All right, everyone, we're back. Sarah, are we recording?
I'm just waiting on YouTube, so
Great.
maybe a minute.
No problem.
Okay. Okay, ready when you are.
Thanks, Sarah. Right, welcome back, everyone. We are going to continue through our agenda. I will just let everybody know that we are finishing the meeting at 5 o'clock. We've got staff who have got childcare commitments. We've got a chairperson who has childcare commitments, and we have got a deputy chairperson who is not available after 5 o'clock. So we will be finishing at 5. My intention is that we get through item 7 and hopefully the work schedule, and item 8 is going to be adjourned until our meeting next month. And I'm hoping we do get through item 7 in its entirety. Right, so we've got, as I say, item 7, the deliberations report on the draft support and funding policy 2022. Julie, I hope you're still with us.
I certainly am.
Wonderful. I will hand it over to you to present the report.
Thank you. So just a couple of comments. I'm really pleased to recommend this policy to you now after quite a long process of development. The summary of submissions is attached to the report, as you will have seen. Submitters made really useful and well-considered points on the draft, and several changes are recommended to improve the policy as an outcome of the consultation process. So we really thank them for the time that they spent looking at a very long and complex piece of work. I think this review goes a long way towards providing Council with a fairer and more transparent policy for the allocation of contestable funds. I'm sure there's still improvements to be made, perhaps often through other processes, but we're really pleased with this piece of work. So that is all I want to say. I just want to let you know that, as always, there's a cast of thousands waiting to answer questions should you need them. So Lily, Cato and Anne-Marie, who did most of the work on this policy, Luke McIndoe and Ben Porter, Steph Valvin and Bryce Hosking. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie, and your entourage as well who are here. Appreciate it. We do have questions. First up, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Julie, and everyone else who contributed to the report. So my question is about sector leads on page 34. So there's a comment around submitters being unsupportive of the funding being taken from the SPG pool. And there seems to have been some weight given to that submission in the fact that the proposal is now that sector leads wouldn't get partnerships until after the next 10-year plan. So my question really is around how the position has changed from when I last asked about how we would do this, and was told, oh, don't worry that the policy on funding and support isn't coming out until after SPGs have been assigned. We can just, I'm sure I was told, we can just assign the same amount of money that's been given through the SPG into a partnership agreement. And so now the position seems to have changed from that. Have I been clear?
Yes, you have indeed. I'm going to ask Lily to comment in response to that question in the first instance.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you for the question. So in regards to whether the position has changed, I think when we started getting into the to the details and especially the operational part. We did sort of identify there might be capacity issues that perhaps might be better responded to through another, through Steph and the team, for them to take in the full consideration of, because this won't end up being specifically a contestable fund. It will then become a renewal of contracts, and to take that full consideration through a process. Does that answer the question?
Not really. No, I'm sorry, it doesn't, Lily, because we were due to consult on this policy during the 10-year plan, and the aim was that this would be consulted on, this policy that we're now doing the deliberations of today, during the 10-year plan. And for capacity reasons, I think, the consultation was delayed. And I specifically asked at the time how this would impact the decision that was made during the 10-year plan deliberations by elected members to include the lead sector funding as partnerships going forward. And I was specifically told, oh, don't worry, Councillor, it won't be an issue, because even if the funding policy isn't approved until after the SPG is finalised, we can simply use the funding envelope that has been determined in the SPG as the partnership agreement funding, if you see what I mean. And so now I seem to be being given there's different advice come through in this paper about delaying the whole thing for another 10-year plan round. That's what I can't understand.
If I might add to that, I think, Councillor, we gave the best advice at the time, and since then we've done consultation, and you can see from the submissions that it's actually not particularly conclusive about what the sector is wanting to do in terms of sector leads. We didn't get a whole lot of submissions necessarily saying, that's great, just take the current SPGs and turn them into sector partners. And so, as the report points out, there are issues to do with, for example, how much of that fund is taken up by the sector leads, and that was raised by submitters. So, of course, those groups that we're talking about are still going to be funded. I guess what we're putting forward in this report, and as a result of the consultation and further discussion about the operational issues that are involved with sector leads, we're suggesting that there be a little bit more consideration. I mean, you can go ahead with them. It's just that there are some outstanding issues. For example, if an organisation becomes a sector lead, we're not sure yet what level of reporting is going to be required by council. If you're expecting to see some sort of Sport 102 level report and analysis for 5 new organisations, then that would be a significant capacity issue for the community development team. And so we're just wanting to make sure that we don't raise the expectations for the sort of reporting that's allowed, and also there needs to be conversations with those potential sector leads that they're getting what they want from their side of the agreement too, because they may not want to enter into a sector lead arrangement if it suddenly became a whole lot more onerous for essentially the same funding as they were going to receive through the SPGs. I might just ask if it's okay for Steph to comment about that too.
Kia ora koutou. Thanks, Julie. Yeah, I guess just to echo those comments, through the consultation, I think it was mixed about, sector leads weren't totally sure what that was going to mean for them if they were going to be a sector lead. So, and I guess we would want to work through that process of who is a sector lead, what that agreement looks like, what the reporting looks like, and that all takes a bit of time to work through so that we can do it properly. And then we would be doing that on top of the SPG assessment process, which is currently still ongoing. yeah, and so that's where this this part of the report has come from.
Okay. I mean, I'll have some comments to make about that later, but for now, I'll just leave that particular issue. Would it be possible, do you think, given the other issues that you've raised around capacity and not being clear what a sector lead organisation is, would it be possible to trial a transition from where we are now to where we would anticipate being at the next 10-year plan? So perhaps, you know, the SPG, I'm just thinking on the fly here, the SPG funding, whatever it is allocated, stays the same, but there's a transition in reporting, or there's a transition in how the organisation, you know, negotiates with council over outcomes and so on. I mean, do you see that that's a possibility, or are we just saying, no, sorry, we can't do this for another 2.5 years?
I'm not sure if Steph wants to comment on that. I mean, I guess I would suggest that it's not really 2.5 years, because obviously the 10-year plan process begins earlier than that, and it's really about these being 3-year arrangements. But recommendation 4 is really aimed at getting some certainty to how this would go from both from the councillor side of the agreement, and also from the sector lead organisation side. So that's our expectation, is that we will continue working on that. A lot of that detail, as Steph has said, is actually operational detail, not necessarily governance decision making.
I'll save the rest for comment, thanks.
Councillors, are there any other questions? No. Oh, yes. Councillor Dingwall.
Apologies, Madam Chair. I'm just trying to process what I've just heard, and I'm just wondering, in terms of, I guess, the steps that we have to go through to get to where governance has asked us to be at, which is around the sector leads. Like, what if this waited till the long-term plan? What would then happen after the long-term plan to be able to have those sector leads operational? In terms of, if we had to wait till the next long-term plan, what would be the delay from the long-term plan to those guys actually being able to do what they need to do as sector leads?
Sorry, I'm not quite sure that I'm clear of the purpose of your question.
I guess what I'm saying is, at the moment, there feels like there's a bit of a delay in getting things set up so that there are sector leads, and we know which sector leads they are, and then they know what their requirements are. If there is a delay in deciding that until the long-term plan, then how much of a delay is there going to be in doing? Does that mean that none of that work will happen until after the long-term plan, and then we start talking about sector leads and those kind of things?
So I'll ask Steve to comment to this, but just first, I think there are two different things here. One is about the consideration of the budget, and we have recommended, because of the consultation findings, that we've suggested to council that you may want to consider that is a separate bucket of funding for clarity, because at the moment there is quite a bit of concern reflected through the submissions that that those sector leads could take up a lot of the SPG funding without perhaps any clarity or direction from council about how that happens. So it's not that council doesn't fund sector lead organisations or can't. That is already in the guidance, and those organisations are being funded. It's more really just about doing some more work to clarify things like reporting, level of expectation on reporting, and that sort of agreement. Steph may wish to comment about the second part.
Sorry, I got a bit lost about what the second part of that question was that I was meant to be responding to.
I guess what I was asking was around timelines. If we don't decide to just go ahead with the sector leads being the sector leads in this bucket, and then starting that work of establishing what it is that we need from sector leads in those relationships. What would the timeline be if we had to wait till the long-term plan to be able to start all of this? From the time of that and then the time of, you know, things actually happening.
I'm not sure I know how to answer that question, but I can talk to, I guess, how long would it take us from our team's effort to set that up? I think it would be similar to, I guess, an SPG assessment process, in that we would want to adhere to the policy and make it a transparent process where we were clear about people having the opportunity to put forward to be a sector lead. We were clear about how we were assessing that, and therefore, and then what the agreement looked like, negotiating that, and then doing the reporting after that. So I think you know, there's a couple of months work in that setup at least, ideally. I'm not sure if that answers your question though. I don't think I have the answers personally.
Can I possibly help here? I mean, wouldn't the process to your question, Renee, be that prior to the next LTP, the council would make a formal policy decision that you were going to have sector leads for certain groups or providers? Then you would ring fence that budget as part of the next LTP and implement it from that point forward. I think the issue we had was we didn't have a policy decision in the lead up to the last LTP, and we still don't have a policy decision at this point in time. There may well be an interim policy decision made as part of this meeting, which might start us on that trajectory. But until such time as we have that, we don't set up the policy and the funding accordingly.
Okay, that has been a bit more helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Hapata.
So from this policy, is any group going to be disadvantaged from what it was before?
Are you talking about sector leads, councillor, or are you?
Well, from the way it was running before to the way it's going to be running now in the future, is any groups going to be disadvantaged? Because
I'm not sure what you mean by disadvantaged. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm sorry, Julie. I'm not trying to be smart or anything. I'm just, us as councillors are trying to work our way through this, and I think we're having trouble with that. So we're trying to find a way to get ourselves through this, and we're struggling. So what I'm trying to say is, from the way it was before to the way it is going to be in the future, any group's going to be disadvantaged.
Sorry, my question of clarification was, are you referring specifically to the sector lead topic, or are you talking about the policy as a whole?
The policy as a whole, any group. So
the policy sets the criteria and decision making for future funding decisions. That will guide decision making in all manner of ways, because council has lots of really complex funding arrangements in place. It doesn't, with all due respect, it doesn't really make sense to ask if anybody will be disadvantaged. There may well be different decisions made in future due to the guidance that this policy provides. That's the point of having a policy, is to provide guidance for decision making. If there's something particular that you would like a response on, I'm happy to provide that, but I'm afraid I can't answer that as a yes/no question.
Oh, it's just been a long day, sorry.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question comes from the recent comment from Mr. Murphy around sort of how there might be further, if I understood the answer correctly, how there might be further policy work to be engaged with before getting to the point of having sector leads identified. And my understanding of the process that we're in right now is we're actually at the culmination of quite a comprehensive piece of policy work. So I'm trying to understand what further policy level process is needed before engaging specific sector entities to be identified as sector leads?
I can answer that, David. I think that it is a timing issue, as Councillor Johnson has pointed out, and we have made it clear and explained the timing delays that there were at every part and every point at which this policy has come before you. And I know we've had questions about the timing on each of those occasions. It is unfortunate that the policy didn't get in front of you before the SPG round, and that point has been made in each of these committee meetings where this policy has been discussed. Staff have apologised for that. It is really beyond our control. I'm afraid we can't do anything about that. But here we have a recommended policy for you to adopt that will provide guidance for decision making about sector leads in future, and that's what's in front of you now.
Yeah, thanks. That's understood, and I certainly wasn't trying to extract an apology for anything. That's well understood in terms of where things are at. I guess what I was trying to understand is, are the steps between here and having sector leads also seen as a policy development process, or is it more of a budgetary and operational type effort to actually commence that?
Definitely the latter. The policy work finishes here, and from then we move into operational matters and potentially budget conversations in future.
Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Julie. Look, I'm perhaps just trying to clarify what Councillor Harpert was probably trying to get to. So within the SPG fund, if that is used for, say, for example, 5 identified sector leads, and there may not be any sort of robust work done around that, if we jumped into that fairly early, could other recipients of the SPG be disadvantaged?
That's really a question for Steph, I think, who's been running the SPG round.
We wouldn't, we're midway through the SPG assessment process, and we wouldn't take that into consideration in terms of our assessment decisions or allocation decisions for this current round.
Madam Chair, if I could just carry on, just one other question. So at the moment, the identified organisations that could potentially be sector leads, at the moment they take up around 20% of that fund. So if they felt that they actually needed more of that fund, then of course if we jumped into this early, potentially those other organisations that are normal recipients of the SPG may in fact actually become disadvantaged. That's what I'm driving at.
I think if by disadvantaged you mean may receive lesser funding because the sector leads received more, then I guess there's a future conversation for the prioritising that goes on in that funding round. That's why we suggested that councillors consider how sector leads are funded in a future budget conversation. I think it's the term disadvantage that we're finding difficult. There in the SPG round there are always assessments made about how good applications are, and as you know, those funds are extremely oversubscribed. So decisions are always made about which groups don't receive the amount of money they've asked for.
Okay, and so really what I'm trying to sort of drive to here is that if we work through this process carefully, strategically, then of course we then protect organisations that may be disadvantaged. Would that be a fair assessment?
I don't see that there would be any bearing or disadvantage through this current SPG round, that it's not going to be a factor in our decision making. So therefore no disadvantage.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor McCallard.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a question probably to Julie or Steph. On page 74, I think on page 24, I just had a question. I understand that this is an operational thing, but as elected members, we do get also a number of people coming to us and asking us all sorts of questions about council decisions. Point F on page 74 declares that all decisions made are final. Is there room for appeals and that sort of thing, or can you please just describe the appeal process? If an application fails, what happens if that needs to be contested, let's say by an applicant? What happens there?
I might ask Lily to comment about that, but then perhaps Steph might like to add something from an operational point of view.
Okay, so in terms of F, that's to give certainty to decision makers on the operational level, but in terms of appeals, which is a separate issue, there is, so F stands, but if people are not happy with the decisions that staff make, they are able to approach councillors just as normal, and councillors are free to make decisions as they please. But in terms of a staff capacity, F is the answer to that.
Oh, okay. Yep, cool. No, it's fine. Thanks.
I just wonder on Councillor McCulloch's question whether Lily or Julie, you could provide a little bit of context as to why all of the decisions go through the SPG process rather than the chamber, because I think there's been quite strong efforts to depoliticise the funding process, and so it's a cross-team approach with the funding panel and those sorts of things, but it's actually removed from elected members. But it hasn't always been the case, is my understanding.
Yes, I think that's right. Various councils, including this one, have gone back and forth on the extent to which councillors are involved in decision making. And I mean, the purpose of having a policy like this is to make sure that decision making is guided by criteria and weighted decision making. I think the point Lily's making is that obviously anybody can ask to speak at a committee or to request something through the chamber, and I mean we're just making the point that councillors can obviously do your role as you wish. What we're saying here is that these processes, the councillors make the decisions about how you would like those decisions to be made by staff, and that at that point that is the outcome, and that we carry on, and that obviously those are reported back through the chamber for various funds. For example, I know SPGs get reported to council as you find there's a report letting you know how the decisions were made and the outcome of those. So I think I'm not sure that we're quite answering the question about the appeal process. That would be a very formal way of going about something. I mean, obviously the staff and the community development team are working with the applicants. This is a small community and there are lots of discussions and work goes on. It's certainly a very connected and joined up approach.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Cheers.
Right, can I just confirm there's no further questions? Okay. Sorry, Lorna, Councillor Johnson, are you jumping in the queue for early comment? Or have you got another question?
I was jumping in the queue for early comment, sorry.
Okay.
I'll jump out again.
No, you can say that's fine. I know what you're doing. Thank you, Julie, Steph, Lily, everybody who's been answering questions. Appreciate that. In terms of the recommendations, we've got 5 recommendations in our order paper, and I do want to separate 3 and 4, which are particularly around the sector leads. And so I'm going to move recommendation 1, 2 and 5, which are all around the policy itself and not specifically around some direction for sector leads. I do know that we have got a alternative recommendation from Councillor Johnson on the sector lead, so I just want to try and keep this process tidy, keeping an eye on time. Looking specifically at 1, 2 and 5, so I'll move those, seconded by Councillor Harpiter, thank you. Is there anybody who would like to speak on 1, 2 or 5? Councillor Johnson.
Sorry, no, I was in the queue from before and hadn't taken myself out. I apologise.
Okay, great. So it doesn't look like we've got any comment on 1, 2 and 5. We have had those moved and seconded. I will read through them quickly and then we will vote on those 3. So recommendation 1, that the council adopt the support and funding policy 2022 attachment 2 of the memorandum entitled Deliberations Report Draft Support and Funding Policy 2022 dated 9 March 2022. Recommendation 2, that the support and funding policy 2022 attachment 2 of the memorandum entitled Deliberations Report Draft Support and Funding Policy 2022 dated 9 March 2022 replaces the community funding policy 2018. And recommendation 5, that the Chief Executive Officer prepare an implementation and monitoring plan for the proposed support and funding policy 2022. Right. So I'll invite you. Can I just check? Have we got everybody on screen? Elected members? Great. Yep, everyone's on. Vote by a show of hands. All in favour? Any opposed? Abstentions? That's carried unanimously. Councillor Johnson, I'll look to you for 3 and 4.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Do you want me to speak to them now?
Yes, if you could read out what you're moving and speak to it.
Okay, could you put it on the screen for me then, please?
I can't, but somebody else can.
Oh, could it be please put on the screen?
Thanks, Carly. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Johnson, I was just checking that was your, is that your alternative?
No, it isn't.
No.
No, so I think we'll leave 3 there, but can we, Councillor Johnson had emailed through an alternative recommendation 4.
I don't.
Councillor Johnson, did you send that to staff or just elected members?
I'm just trying to find the email now, sorry.
I've got the email. I'll forward it to Carly. You
Okay.
can talk to it now.
Okay, so I guess a few points. The first one is that I agree with staff that there should be a separate fund for the sector lead partnership. Definitely, I think that's the message that we heard from both potential sector lead organisations themselves and the wider community. And that's to avoid that perception that the sector leads are sort of dipping into the same pot as the organisations that they're supporting are also trying to get money from. So I support that as a principle. I think the difficult situation we've ended up in here is that because of the delays to this funding policy and the need for the SPG round to proceed as normal, we're now in a situation where the SPG allocations are being determined as we speak. So, applications went in at the end of last year. And the funding policy that we're approving today is coming quite late into the piece. And, I'm not intending to go through the reasons why that has happened, but nevertheless, that's where we are today. So what I want to avoid is a situation where we're not nimble and agile as we would like to be. But when the community brings us requests, and a request for this type of funding has been brought to the last 2 LTPs, consultation rounds, when the community brings us a request, I think it's better if we can act on that request in a timely way, and waiting until the following 10-year plan to reconsult again on a separate line item, I just think is too long. So, you know, I was trying to get to, could we trial this? Could we do this and that? I have had a feeling that this has been a direction that elected members are keen to pursue, but it's been hard to get the sort of the practicalities of how we might do it established. And so, you know, I'm taking on board the fact that staff say that there are capacity issues and they can't get this up and running overnight. I totally get that. But nevertheless, we've got time before the next 10-year plan. We've got 2 full years before we consult on it. And I think we should be using that time to try and trial some aspects of the sector lead partnership agreements. Now, I just want to talk as briefly as I can about this SPG fund. The fact is that these organisations are being funded right now from the SPG fund. And so I don't see that funding them from the SPG fund is disadvantaging another organisation. It isn't. They've been funded from the SPG fund for several years. But what we could do is to say, well, whatever allocation they've got in this SPG round, that's the funding that we would apply to a partnership agreement. We're not disadvantaging any other group by doing that, you know. But if we just do nothing for 2 years and then bring it in as a line item, as a separate budget item, I don't think it's going to go anywhere, because although I recognise, and, you know, every 10-year plan, I try and increase the amount of pot that we have in the SPG fund, I recognise that there are other funding, you know, priorities on us as council. And I doubt very much whether councillors are going to agree to a totally new separate fund in addition to the current strategic priority grant. So, you know, the intention was always to apportion off the amount from the strategic priority grant into the separate line fund, not to establish an additional fund on top. So anyway, to cut a long story short, I'm fine with it being a separate line item in the next 10-year plan, but I want us to get on with doing something before then. And so recommendation 4 is an attempt at compromise and trying to get something done before the 2 years are up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. And can I just confirm with you that you're happy to move recommendation 3 as well, because it is essentially a permanent move, whereas recommendation 4 is a trial, so they can still go hand in hand?
Yes, I think so, because I think we all agree that it would be better for the partnership fund to be a separate budget item. It's just that where we are now is it's a bit too late for doing that this time round.
Thank you, you've clarified that. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just speaking in support of the points already made by Councillor Johnson, to note that there were 4 submissions which have been categorised as do not support funding from SPCG. SPG? Too long. And my read of that, and subsequent conversations with some of those submitters, is that their hesitation is about being seen to be taking money from SPG. It's not about this is a bad idea. It's about the way that looks and feels, and remembering that Community Services Council in particular were burned by this in the last long-term plan when we took money to enable them to run Hancock Community House, and they were on the back foot with that, and they had to defend it to their community. And the last thing I want is for us to do that again. But I cannot see a different way of doing this, and believe me, I've thought about it. And I'll just draw elected members' attention to the officer comment, which says the direction is for funding to be allocated from strategic priority grants budget. This is a political decision. This is our decision to make. We can go ahead with a trial. We can see how it goes. We can get some reporting back. We're not talking about increasing the funding allocation. We're just talking about having a small bucket inside a big bucket. And then at long-term plan, we'll take the buckets apart. It's that straightforward at one level, and encourage us to give it a go, because we know sector lead organisation structures work. It's worked remarkably well for Sport Manawatu. So why would we not extend that successful model to our other sector leads, and why would we make them wait?
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. Is there anyone else wishing to comment? Councillor Johnson, I assume you don't need a right of reply to Councillor Bowen's remarks? Great, thank you. Okay, so we're going to be voting on 3 and 4. I will just read those out. So recommendation 3, that a sector lead partnership fund is referred to the 2024-2034 10-year plan process for consideration as a separate budget item. And recommendation 4, that the Chief Executive trial the sector lead partnership agreements using the funding that has already been assigned to those organisations through the 2022 allocations from the SPG fund, and report back to Community Development Committee prior to the development of the next 10-year plan, and delete the line on top of page 89 once Council has determined a funding source for any sector lead arrangements. That is in the name of Councillor Johnson and Councillor Bowen. We will vote by a show of hands as soon as I have you all back on my screen. Thanks, Carly. All right, so all those in favour? Any opposed? Sorry, Councillor Barrett, that's an opposed? Or a slow hand?
No, that was definitely in favour.
Thank you. Any opposition? My apologies, I did not mean to call your hand slow. Any abstentions? Great.
I just noticed Councillor Finlay. Is he there? I see he's just got a face shot there.
No, he voted in support. Thank you, Councillor Dennison, for
just
checking
on my
that.
screen. Thank you.
Yeah, no abstentions. Right, I'll call that as carried. It's been a very long day. Right, so looking to our agenda, we've got items 8 and 10, which I am deferring till next month's meeting. So that will conclude our business for today. Nō reira, ngā mihi nui kia koutou, ina mana, ina reo, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'll declare the meeting closed. Thanks, everyone.
Ta ta.